In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this handy charging station. The way that it works, it sits over the top of the plug while it's in the socket, and the lead goes down to your phone, which sits inside the pocket, and any extra wires can go inside there as well. It's really easy to make, and I think what might be quite nice is if you could personalise it, because there's going to be more than one person in your household, I'm sure, that has a mobile phone that needs charging. So you can maybe put initials or a piece of applique on the front of it. Make a great gift idea as well, I think. If you're struggling to buy or make something for a birthday or a Christmas present, then these are going to be absolutely ideal. It's great for a beginner project as well, because it's really not complicated and it is rather quick to make too. So let's have a look at the materials that you need and then we'll get sewing. My 2 pieces of main fabric measure 7 inches across and 12 inches in length. You can vary the size of these, it doesn't have to be that size. So slightly smaller, slightly larger, it depends what you're actually going to be holding in here and charging. And then my pocket, which goes on the front, you can see is slightly wider. So this measures 8 inches across this way and lengthways 14 inches. And I folded that in half and pressed it. I also need a piece of elastic, slightly longer than the 8 inches. That's going to go across the top of the pocket. I have my bias binding, and this is 3/4 inch bias binding. If you only have 1 inch bias binding, that's fine as well. And a cocktail stick. Basically, if you're putting something heavy inside here, the top can bend a little bit. So I'm just going to give you a little tip by putting in between the 2 layers of fabric a cocktail stick, and then that's going to stop it from bending. Another way that you could do that would be to curve the top, but we're keeping it simple, so we're keeping it square. I've put a medium weight stabiliser on the backs of both pieces of the fabric. On both pieces, to make it that little bit heavier. You could, if you wanted to, use a fusible foam, just something to make your fabric a little bit more rigid so that it holds its shape, because I'm only using a craft weight cotton, so it could go all floppy and we don't want that. So that's been fused onto the wrong sides. I'm going to draw a box on the wrong side of one of the pieces. They're both the same, so it doesn't matter which one. And it's going to be 1.5 inches from the top and 1.5 inches from each side, just to make sure it's in the centre. There we go. So a rectangle shape, which is going to be 2.5 inches deep. Like so. So nice and centrally. Like that. So it's 3 inches across this way and 2.5 inches down this way. I just square that off a little bit. It doesn't look quite square to me. There we go, we're fine. Then we'll put the 2 pieces of the outer fabric right sides together, and using a small stitch on the sewing machine, I'm going to sew around the outside of the box. Then, taking a sharp pair of scissors, I'm going to cut away the centre of the box. So snip into the corners right up to the stitches, but be careful not to cut through them. So into all 4 corners. And then trim this fabric quite close to the seam. So that's about 1/8 of an inch or a couple of millimetres away from the seam. And then we're going to post the fabric through the hole and press. So you probably find it easier just to give the seams a bit of a press before you post. Then we'll push this through, no matter which way it goes. And then press again. And because you snip straight into the corners, you're going to get a really nice neat finish with no puckering on the corners. So iron this. If you have any 505 sprays or those kind of spray adhesives, you could actually now glue the two pieces together. Just helps to hold it together when you put the bias binding on the pockets on, but that's not necessary if you don't have any. And there is my box. So I'm now going to top stitch all the way around the edge, and that'll give a nice finish to the hole, but it'll also hold it all in place. So it gives a nice neat sharp finish. And if you're confident, you could use a contrasting coloured thread to make a nice border. Or of course trims. You can see how versatile this is. I'm giving you the basic instructions, but you can embellish to your heart's content. Add a few buttons, decorate it, maybe put some lace around it. Depends who it's for really and which room it's going to go in, doesn't it? I love the idea of having things like this to match your room as well. So this could be in the same fabric as your bedroom curtains or the cushions in your living room. It's very coordinated. Mine actually matches my sewing machine mat. Right, now I'm going to put the little cocktail stick in, and just to hold that in place, I'll put some wet glue inside there as well. So just run that along the seam. It doesn't take very much. Pop the stick in there. And then we'll leave that to dry. Not even noticeable. Right, let's make up the pocket. So I've folded my pocket fabric in half. I'm going to measure 1 inch from each bottom corner. And cut away. So now the base of the pocket measures the same width as the holder, and the top will be brought in when the elastic goes in there, because that'll gather it. So let's trim away these. I'd normally use my rotary cutter ruler and mat. It makes it very quick, but if you don't have any, scissors are fine. Open it out, and I'm going to place the elastic just underneath that crease line and just tack it into one side. This is such an easy way of fitting elastic into pockets, because there's no putting your elastic onto a safety pin and feeding it through channels or the like. So leave the elastic lying across that crease line, fold it back over, and I'm going to sew just underneath the elastic here. I can feel where the ridge is. Don't sew through the elastic, else you won't be able to gather it. This goes on the main piece, line up the bottom, and we'll sew straight across here. And I'm sewing quite close to the edge because my bias binding is going to cover the stitches. So I don't want the seam to be showing underneath the bias binding. That'll make sense in a minute. Right, and then we're going to turn the edge that you've already sewn with the elastic so that the straight edges are lined up like so, and sew down there. And then we're going to pull the elastic so that the top of the pocket is the same width as the back. So evenly gather this all across. You can do a little bit more. There we go. Then line up these two sides and sew down here. Excuse me. So again, evenly space the elastic across the top, and then we can trim off the extra pieces of elastic. So we just need to put the bias binding around the edge now. So I like to start at the bottom and fold the end of the tape under to make it neat. And this time I'm going to sew the bias binding from the back, fold it over to the front, and then machine sew. If I'm making a quilt or a bag, or including this technique in dressmaking, I would always hand sew. But for something like this, where the back isn't going to be seen, it doesn't have to be perfect from the machine sewn side. Nice if it is perfect, but it doesn't always work that way. So line up the edge of your bias tape with the edge of your fabric like so, and I'm going to mitre the corners. I know I've shown you this before, but we'll do it again because it looks really neat. The width of this section here, I need to stop that width from the edge of the fabric so I can see where the edge of the fabric is. So that kind of makes a box like that. So there's the edge of my fabric. You don't need to draw this every time you do it. I'm just trying to explain if you haven't seen it before. So I'm going to sew all the way down this crease line and stop here. And literally reverse a couple of stitches back and take your work out. So we have this. Then I'm going to fold the edge around the edge of my work. So I've got a nice neat corner here, and that forms a little triangle. And then I carry on sewing from the edge of the crease all the way down, and we do that in all four corners. Now when I come back to the beginning, I've overlapped the ends there. So this is why the first part was folded over. Line up that crease against the stitches that you just made and sew. Then this is how the mitered corners work. So when we open this out and fold it around to the front, you'll see automatically you've got that lovely 45-degree mitered corner, and I think that looks so smart. And when we come round to the front side, again this wraps over the stitch line, and again you get that nice mitered corner. Now while you're there, you can see as I'm folding this over, it doesn't quite cover the seam enough. I can still see the stitches here. So I'm moving the bias binding out of the way, and I'm just going to trim this back. So now when I fold it over, it'll cover the stitches. That's what we want to see, or that's what we don't want to see. So I can see that this needs trimming a little bit as well, that's fine. and a little bit on this side as well. So this folds to the front, and the reason I've done it this way, I have done it on other projects, is that when I sew from the top, I can see exactly where the stitches are, and I can keep them nice and straight. If this were the normal way that I'd put on bias binding, so you apply to the front and fold to the back, so in effect this would be the front, when I sew this part down on the back, I can't guarantee that on the back of my work, so that'll be underneath the sewing machine, I can't guarantee that that's going to be absolutely perfect. That's why I prefer to sew by hand in the traditional way. But this time, because I'm sewing from the front, I know that my stitch is going to be absolutely perfect. So I'm going to take my time with this. I can use a few clips maybe to hold that in place. And again, when I come to the corners, I'm going to neatly fold them over, make the mitre, stop with my needle down here, and then carry on sewing. And then we'll be finished. So there you go, another phone charger holder finished. I hope you enjoy making yours.